Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Zanes, Vice President of Communications with the Lync Learning Alliance. Thank you all for joining us today in the second of a year-long series of webinars designed to support the college and career preparation work of practitioners, district leaders, and partners. Our webinar will begin in just a moment after we cover some technical housekeeping details. So first, today's webinar is designed to be highly interactive with multiple ways to engage. You can use the question function to share your thoughts or questions with panelists at any time. If the panel is minimized, make sure to click the arrow on top to expand it and type your note and press send. We'll be watching the space throughout the session and we'll address as many comments as we can. Towards the end of the webinar, there will be a dedicated Q&A time when you can ask questions via phone. We'll let you know when it's time to raise your hand. You click the hand icon with the green arrow to do it, and we'll call on you and unmute your line. At the conclusion of today's conversation, a brief survey will appear on your screens. If you have a moment, we would greatly appreciate your feedback on this webinar, as well as your input to inform future topics to be covered at webinars and in-person events. And last but not least, this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed along with corresponding tools following today's dialogue. Now we'll begin the session with Stanton, President of the Lync Learning Alliance.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session on integrated student support, which is an essential component of Lync Learning and actually one of the keys to delivering it with excellence and equity. Thanks for being with us today, and we're thrilled to have so many committed leaders from the Lync Learning field. Over 100 people have registered for this webinar. As Rachel said, I'm Stanton, and I have the honor of moderating today's event. Today, we're going to be in conversation with two of my heroes, Jorge Ruiz de Velasco, who's the Deputy Director of the John Gardner Center at Stanford University, and Marisa Saunders, who's the Associate Director for Research at the UCLA Center for Community Schooling. Both of these incredibly brilliant, talented, and inspiring leaders have helped build Lync Learning and the approach from its inception, and has helped all of us better understand effective youth development and learning and how those really work together to achieve equity and excellence in education. So really looking forward to talking with them both today, as I always do. But before we start, just want to provide some really brief grounding so that all participants start together on the same footing. So many of you on the call today, I know, have been involved with Lync Learning for a long time, and together we're part of a movement that's transforming college and career preparation and putting every student in the position to pursue the full range of post-secondary options. I think we all together believe in the unlimited potential of young people and in the power of quality Lync Learning implementation. So that's why we want to see 1 million young people in gold certified Lync Learning pathways by 2030. And the Lync Learning field is going for gold, which is the highest standard for college and career preparation, by integrating the 4 elements of Lync Learning in ways that deliver for all young people. As most of you know, there are 4 elements that are essential to this excellence and equity. One is rigorous academics, aligned to admissions requirements for state colleges and universities. Number 2, career and technical education, delivering concrete knowledge and skills through a carefully structured sequence of courses. Work-based learning, which provides students with exposure to real-world workplaces via job shadowing, apprenticeships, internships, and more. And comprehensive support services, which include counseling, supplemental instruction, and other essential resources that address individual needs of all students. So today's webinar is going to help us all go deeper into the support services pillar of Lync Learning. And frankly, as a field, it's time that we pay greater collective attention to this pillar, which is often the most misunderstood and least discussed. And as with all components of Lync Learning, we want to make sure we're working from a research and evidence base to do so. This is why we're so happy to have Marisa and Jorge here with us today. They're both instrumental to a team that in March introduced a guide to student supports for college and career pathways. This work is especially exciting because it focuses on the integration of comprehensive student supports, which is really at the heart of Lync learning. So Jorge, I think this guide is drawing a lot of attention and interest and downloads on the Gardner Center website, isn't it?
Yep, it's about the second biggest hit getter on our website in our 10-year history.
That's so exciting because I think it speaks to both the appetite for understanding this better and the great work that you all have done to help practitioners know how to address the comprehensive supports part of Lync learning. So as always, it's a joy to be with both you and Marisa. I've known you both throughout this Lync learning journey over more than a decade. But I want to tell the listeners a little bit more about each of you. So let me start with Jorge. Jorge's commitment to educational justice includes work as a civil rights lawyer for the U.S. Department of Education. Jorge was involved in many stages of visioning the Lync learning from its inception, both as a philanthropist and a researcher working at both the Irvine Foundation and Ford Foundation. He was also part of the team that released a seminal paper on the work that he's developed about integrated student supports in 2016, and he's the editor of the new guidebook we're discussing today. Marisa was also involved at the inception of Lync learning and heads down with all of us as we work to ensure that Lync learning was designed to drive equity. She wrote the 2013 guidebook on equity and Lync learning implementation that's been used by so many in the field already, and her recent work is focused on the role of school districts to support teacher and principal capacity. So let's hear from the two of you. Can you start us with a description of what integrated student supports means and share with everyone on the webinar what you're learning about how schools deliver these supports?
And thank you so much for that. Very generous introduction. Well, at the Gardner Center, when we began this project, we really wanted to re-immerse ourselves in the shared understanding of what Lync learning movement's very foundational goals were. And those are, as you said, to remake the high school into a driving force for equity and social mobility, and to reimagine the existing 1950s high school as a place where every young person is supported to be successful in an educational pathway of their choice. We focused on these goals. We continuously asked ourselves, what does that look like? How do schools, districts, and their partners, like some of you on the call, work to get there? We wanted to make sure that we found real-world case examples that illustrated why supports matter to learning outcomes and academic success. We can assure you that there's solid evidence in the research base and in practitioner experience that integrated student supports that are specifically designed to support pathway goals contribute to the educational persistence of all students, especially English learners and those who enter high school with academic challenges. We also set out to do this research in a way that made sure that we honored and included practitioner voice. So in addition to reviewing the literature, we also reviewed the work of very key intermediaries and Lync learning advocates that were working to build capacity out in the field. So we observed and spent a lot of time observing the work of ConnectEd, the Center for Powerful Public Schools in Los Angeles, the Career Ladders Project in Oakland, the CSU Long Beach School of Education's faculty, which has a project around capacity development for Lync learning, and Tamika McGlone at Kazan at Berkeley, who was very generous with her time and wisdom on all this. A lot of their work is featured in the guidebook. We aim to develop case studies focused on specific problems of practice in Lync learning as they emerged from our observations and from the field. And these included real schools in Los Angeles, in the Bay Area, and the Salinas Valley. What we found basically was that supporting kids to be successful in their pathways was not about a menu of supports or model practices. I think often educators, principals, teachers are told to faithfully adopt a set of best practices that were successful somewhere else. What we found that distinguished higher performing schools was that it was really a process for them of adapting what others had done and of figuring out where each of their students were academically and creating learner-centered schools that adapted models and supports in real-time context to the needs of every kid in their school. You know, put more simply, the typical high school is still a very content-centered place. Adults teach subjects and implement interventions in very fixed ways, and student learning varies. And that's by design because the high school was kind of designed to sort students. Lync learning, on the other hand, is a learner-centered approach. The delivery of content and support varies according to the specific content and needs of learners in specific places and schools. So the case studies we describe in the guidebook have a common pattern that we'll talk about as we go through some of the described cases. Teachers in each of those schools invariably began by asking, who are our students? They sort of engaged in a self-study. Often, the principal engaged the services of WASC or of the Alliance or one of the intermediaries to help them go through a self-study. And they ask, what are we asking our students to be able to do and know? And how are we supporting all of them to reach rigorous standards? So then each case then describes how the adults, the teachers, the partners, the employers, the counselors, the librarians took collaborative action to weave together all the interventions at a school and the supports that were available into a coherent educational experience for every kid in that school. In this next slide, we review here the 5 domains of learning for college and career readiness. And as you see this slide, I think it will be very familiar to a lot of you. But here's an important insight about this wheel. Most of the successful sites integrated the range of supports they provided students with the learning demands of each pathway. They didn't divide up the work of academic, technical, workplace so much as they made sure that each one of them supported the other in a way that was coherent from the student perspective. There's been a lot of work, I know, as you implement Lync learning to make sure that the academic, technical, and workplace learning pieces sing together and reinforce each other. But the college and career knowledge piece, the social emotional learning piece, the supports piece is often held separately by different people. But I think in high performing schools, they're part of the same ring. And in each of those areas, every adult is asking, how am I working with kids to make sure that what they're doing as they go to classes with their technical people, their workplace, their after school, they're all getting reinforcing supports that lead to success. In the next slide, this visual infographic sort of provides a way to see how the performing sites are pursuing integration to achieve what we call equity by design. So at the school level, the focus of each case study is in how educators work with their service providers, the community-based partners, the employers, and all others to make sure that all supports are directly related to advancing one or more of the specific learning objectives that students have to achieve in their pathway. Now, in many ways, this seems intuitive, but in a lot of the cases, what you're actually seeing are school leaders who are struggling to make sure that their after-school tutoring, their counselors, their employers are not just doing their own thing, unmoored from the learning goals, but everyone understands what the learning goals are, and they are all pulling together in the same way. At the district level, integration, the word integration relates to how student supports at the school level are integrated with district-wide strategies for the implementation of the Common Core, with initiatives for supporting social emotional learning, or regional strategies. So our case studies illustrate how higher performing sites are supported by district policies that build teacher capacity and agency of all the adults, including employers and community partners, to work together on behalf of all kids. So some concrete examples. Our guidebook has 7 brief case studies focused on problems of practice as they presented themselves in real schools. We don't have time to go through all of them in detail, but I will describe 4 of the problems of practice, or 4 of the case studies that address, say, school level or pathway level problems of integrated supports. And Marisa, my colleague and co-editor, will talk about a set of cases that focus on system levels issues at the school or a community or regional level. The first case example is actually from a health advocacy pathway in Los Angeles. This particular pathway is in a school that is also a receiving site for unaccompanied minors from Central America, and is situated in a really high poverty neighborhood. So the challenge for this school, although it was peculiar to its case, is actually one that we see in just about every pathway. And that's how do we make sure that every single student in our pathway is prepared to have a successful semester-long workplace learning experience, in this case with a local health clinic or health advocacy organization that reinforced the pathway goals. So here they had a lot of English learners and a lot of kids who had never been in clinics and hospitals. And how do we prepare every one of them to have a successful internship? So what they did in this particular case was they piloted an induction program for all the employers. They didn't just ask them, take some of our kids and give them internships. They said, we want the employers to come to the school site and be part of a seminar and agree in advance to understand what the specific learning objectives are of our pathway, and to commit to advancing one or more of those SLOs, the specific learning objectives, during the internship. They also internally needed to prepare kids way in advance of their senior year when they did their internships to be successful. And so since this was a health advocacy pathway, what they did was they used a peer mentorship program where all the sophomores and juniors took a course on peer mentorship and health advocacy, and each one of the sophomore and juniors were paired with an incoming freshman as a mentee, and they were to be their mentee all year long, and they were mentored in the course. The sophomores and juniors were taught in a course how to model the behaviors of health advocacy with young people. And this was a 2-year ramp up to the 4th year internship and capstone course. And this is how they helped every single kid be ready for a workplace learning experience, but also help the employers understand who is coming and how to connect with them and how to build their pathway knowledge. A second example is from a school that had 3 pathways in San Francisco. And like a lot of your pathways, it had made a transition from being a traditional, regular high school. But after making a rocky transition from their traditional model to a path to three pathways, and implementing semi-block scheduling in the morning and the Common Core standards, they realized that all their pre-existing partners, their out-of-school partners, their tutors, their college knowledge partners, about 12 organizations who worked on their campus every day were still doing their own thing, as though none of the pathway changes had occurred. Tutors and advisors didn't know what the school learning goals were, and teachers often didn't know what was happening with kids when they referred them to tutoring and to after-school services. A lot of those services were also opt-in, so some students opted into a lot of services and others didn't opt in at all, often the most needy students, exacerbating inequalities across the school. So they went on a journey. They required all of their after-school, out-of-school partners to spend time during the morning 90-minute blocks with teachers in classrooms during those sessions, and to act as student success coaches, to bring their services into classrooms for part of the day, and to make sure that those services were delivered to all students during breakout sessions and in concert with teachers in real time in classrooms. So they not only asked the providers to push into classrooms, but they provided them with professional development about how to do that successfully within their pathway. They also then looked to their counselors and teachers and helped them to push out into these other times during the school to act as student success coaches. So the counselors spent time during advisory that teachers ran each week with students in classrooms, and teachers every teacher took on students to whom they were personal success coaches, really transforming all the adults in the school into success coaches, and sort of pushing the services into classrooms and pushing teachers and counselors out into out-of-school time spaces. The third and fourth cases I'll spend a little bit of left time with, but I encourage you to download and read them. The third is about a professional development program developed by CSU Long Beach, counselor ed program that trains counselors to specifically work in pathway programs. You know, a lot of counselors are trained to work in traditional high schools and to be sorters. And a counselor in a pathway program needs to learn to be a coach and a guide to success for every kid. And so this particular program helps counselors integrate better into pathway programs and to work more effectively with Lync in the Lync learning model. A fourth case study took a dive into and I commend this to anyone in a district that operates a continuation high school or other alternative high schools. In this case study, we featured a collaboration between the Career Ladders Project and Oakland Unified to implement career-themed pathways, emphasizing paid internships and community college enrollments in all of their continuation high schools. The district has 3 of them, and each one has a pathway. So students who then transfer into continuation can choose one of 3 pathways, and in those pathways are on a journey to really strengthen their Lync learning practices, particularly those around dual enrollment and paid internships. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand it over to Marisa to talk about some of the case studies that involve system-level issues.
Thank you, Jorge, for providing this critical context, and thank you, Anne, for that very warm introduction. So I'd like to continue with this really important topic of coherency that Jorge raised. This idea that folks aren't just doing their own thing, but that they are working collaboratively to address students' barriers to learning in order to ensure effective student engagement with Lync learning components. And as Jorge shared, we identified the importance of coherency at the pathway level, where folks are working across the pathway or horizontally to integrate student supports. But we also identified the importance of integrating services vertically so that there is alignment between Lync learning and other school-wide strategies, between Lync learning and other district-wide strategies, or alignment between Lync learning and other regional strategies for providing student supports to ensure college, career, and civic readiness among all students. So the guidebook highlights 3 case studies of vertical integration, and all 3 cases demonstrate how Lync learning can form part of an integrative system of learning supports and instructional delivery that best meets the needs of all students. I wanted to provide a brief overview of these studies so that you get a sense of vertical integration in action. So the first study explores how schools can provide support to students by tapping into the wealth of community assets, including the engagement of families to facilitate equitable access to college and career-ready learning. So while there is plenty of evidence and a lot of research out there that demonstrates the positive relationship between parent and family engagement and students' academic success, many schools struggle with finding appropriate mechanisms to engage with the families of high schoolers. So this chapter describes how Lync learning pathways integrated with a community schools approach in both Oakland and in Los Angeles to address this particular problem. And by integrating these 2 approaches, the schools created a coherent strategy that ensured all facets of a student's learning experience, everything from providing opportunities for deep teacher-student relationships, providing students with opportunities to bridge their home and school worlds through student-led family engagement opportunities, to after-school programming and family support services. All of these experiences were aligned towards preparing their students for success in college, career, and civic life. And adults in these settings, including families and parents, were partnering and learning from each other to best meet the needs of their students. And I want to stress this idea of the expertise and the knowledge of adults, both teachers and parents, being recognized and listed through this integrative approach. So the second case explores how school district level administrators collaborate with school and pathway leaders to ensure that teaching and learning in pathways is coherently aligned to district-wide learning goals and standards. So given the very unique and distinctive features of pathways based on the theme of the pathway, the organizational structure, and the community it serves, how do districts create coherency across pathways to ensure both high-quality implementation and to ensure that pathways continue to meet the goals and the expectations of the larger district, like the implementation of the Common Core state standards, A through G, assessment requirements, and other district, state, and federal requirements. So in this chapter, we had a chance to learn from the LAUSD's Lync Learning Office and the strategies that they have put in place to ensure coherency. And we have found that they established 3 primary strategies. The first is an effective pathway onboarding process that makes sure that all school staff within a site are ready and committed to the implementation of Lync learning, as well as ready to lead and shape the work of the pathway to make sure it meets the needs of their community. Second strategy is that the district provides a wide range of implementation supports, including professional development and coaching. And these strategies, these supports assist teachers in connecting their work to the vision of the district, connecting specific learning objectives of the pathways to Common Core state standards, for example, or they learn how they can provide consistent and coherent services to all English learners as outlined in the district's English Learner Master Plan. These are just some examples. But importantly, though, adults in the school setting are not only seen as learners, but they are also viewed as experts. As such, knowledge moves up from the school level, from those who are working most closely with students and with families, up to the district to contribute to this idea of system coherence and to deepen the understanding of the approach, both within and beyond the pathways. So the third strategy I wanted to draw attention to is that the district has repositioned the work of the Lync Learning Office as central to ongoing curriculum and instruction improvement efforts. The work of the Lync Learning Office is not siloed, but it is central to district-wide strategies for readying all students for college, career, and civic life. The administrator, for example, forms part of the district instructional leadership team and is working to integrate the Lync learning approach within ongoing district-wide instruction and curriculum improvement strategies. So the third case study tells the incredible story of districts and post-secondary institutions that have collaborated to assist students in their transition and their persistence into and through post-secondary education. In order to address the problem of post-secondary attrition, leaders from Cal State Monterey Bay, a local community college, the County Office of Education in Monterey, and district-level partners work to identify common goals, including a strategy for providing additional supports to students, and then developed a set of actions to meet those established goals. So collaboratively, these partners work to develop and pilot a new 12th grade math course that was designed to ensure college readiness. They also address the need for professional development to build capacity for implementation. And notably, they also created a learning community so that educators could share their expertise and experiences around the implementation of the new course and to learn from each other, as well as to influence continuous improvement. So together, these three case studies highlight that when we discuss integrated student support and the importance of effectively addressing barriers to learning, we are talking about more than just the delivery of services or creating a menu of supports. What we are talking about is creating learning environments where adults continue to engage in a learning process, where they're allowed to develop new skills, acquire new insights and beliefs about their students, about their families, and the communities that they work in to best meet the needs of their students and to successfully integrate students' academic learning with identified needed support. This can't happen in isolated classrooms. We know that. This happens within a school culture and a larger system that enables adults to work collaboratively to both identify and to address problems of practice, and to ensure that all students have equitable access to learning opportunities that ready them for success in college, career, and civic life. And with that, I'd love to hand the figurative microphone over to Renita Gua from the Lync Learning Alliance.
Great, thank you, Marisa and Jorge. This is such an excellent dialogue. We know everyone on the call is eager to engage, so let's open up the session for question and answer session. Just as a reminder, feel free to submit questions via the chat box in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you wish to ask a question by phone instead, just click the hand icon with the green arrow next to it. When it's your turn to talk, we'll call on you and unmute the line. So I'm going to give everybody just 30 seconds or so to think of some questions. And again, feel free to chat in the box, type in a question in the chat box, or to raise your hand and I'll call on you. And while we're waiting, Jorge, I have a question for you. You talked about the importance of adult collaboration so that, folks can move away from this idea of a menu of supports and instead weave together a more cohesive and integrated approach to student support. Can you tell us what stands in the way of that type of collaboration and some of the steps that schools and pathways and districts have taken to overcome some of those challenges?
Sure. I think collaboration is one of those words like, happiness. It's a good that sounds easy, but anyone who spends any time in a high school knows that the modern high school is a complex, bureaucratic place. And one way that you deal with the challenges of trying to work with, maybe 800 students and 100 faculty and many administrators in a complex district that's also a bureaucracy and is you divide up work. And everyone stays in their lane, and teachers teach their subjects, and the employers do their internships, and the after-school providers do their own thing, often with their own money and funding streams. Getting them, for example, to work together, even through pathways, is a challenge, and it's an ongoing challenge because it isn't something you solve once and then it's done, but rather continually every adult in the building needs to have time to sit down with their data, for example. So data is often one of the ways of breaking down those silos, of asking everyone to sit down and inquire together with data. Who are our students? How are we working together? How does what the tutorial program support what's happening in classrooms? How does what we do in the classroom support kids to be successful in internships, and so on? And it isn't, I think in the best sites, they'll tell you it's not a problem that goes away. It is a challenge that they have to work at every day and keep inventing and keep getting better at so that they don't slide back into their own boxes.
Great. Thank you, Jorge. Appreciate that. Again, encourage folks to jump into the conversation by either raising your hand and we'll unmute your phone line, or typing in a question in the chat box. While we're waiting for folks to jump in, Marisa, I have a question for you. I'm wondering, you talked about the idea of adults being learners. I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on that and sort of how that looks in practice, and maybe provide some more examples of what that looks like in some of the sites that you visited.
Yeah, so this is actually related to the question you posed to Jorge a minute ago. What we saw across sites is that there's not only this space for teachers to collaborate, and as Jorge pointed out, there's a whole host of challenges associated with carving out that time during the school day. But what was critical for the educators that we spoke to was this idea that they were seen as experts and treated as professionals. They really felt that they owned knowledge and expertise, and that was of interest to folks, and that knowledge and expertise was helping to shape the implementation of Lync learning across the pathway. And that information was also moving up this vertical, that arrow that Jorge identified in that triangular figure there, that information was moving up, and it was also valued as such. It was also valued at the district level. But being seen as experts and treated as professionals also meant for teachers that there was some sort of compensation. So across these schools, there were efforts made to compensate teachers for their time, staying after school to calibrate and judge senior portfolio defenses, for example, or attending learning workshops, professional development on weekends. There was a real effort to identify and treat teachers not only as learners but as experts.
Right. Thank you, Marisa. And actually, I have a follow-up question that came up in the question panel. It's from Esther Solomon from LAUSD. How might we do more work to support counselors in being active participants in pathway design and student supports? What best practices exist? I'm wondering if either Marisa or Jorge could speak to that.
Well, counselors are an example of a group of professionals in the high school that actually often mind their own lane. And often a traditional school will shift over to being a pathway school, but the counselors will continue to do their business the way they've always done it. And so for counselors, when you talk to them about sort of making a successful transition to work in pathway programs, they talk about how important it is for them to be part of the same professional development that teachers get. So they talk about how important it is that when you are planning your pathway at the very outset, you include your counselors in understanding what are the learning goals for students in the pathway, what are the expectations, and what role might the counselor play in advancing social emotional learning goals and in advancing transitions to post-secondary. And it is that collaboration that often doesn't happen because counselors are often thought of, this is what they do. They sit in their offices and they wait for students to come. And it's breaking that silo and making them part of a community with the teachers and with the community partners at the school, which is what counselors say makes them much more effective in understanding how they can really help kids succeed in pathways.
Yeah, I would just add that in the schools we have had a chance to visit, that providing integrated student supports is really an all hands on deck endeavor, which means counselors are seen as part of this shift to rethinking teaching and learning so that academic content and students' social, emotional, and cognitive development are joined throughout the school day, not as something extracurricular or something that happens just before or after school or just within the counseling office, but it begins with all of the adults, including counselors.
Great, thank you. One of the other things that you guys touch on in your guidebook is the role of teachers, sort of the in-classroom, the supports that are in classroom as well as the out-of-classroom supports. Just wondering if you could speak to that just really briefly, because I thought that was a really important, some important points that you make in the guidebook. And it could be either one of you. Sorry.
Go for it.
Well, as I understand the question, it's about the support that teachers receive?
The support that teachers, the sort of the in-classroom supports, the embedded supports within the classroom, right, and it sort of flows in and out of the classroom?
Well, one of them is, one of the challenges of a teacher who, say, is a math teacher. The first level of challenge in implementing Lync learning is the kind of professional development and the support they get to open their classroom to, say, someone with technical expertise in the pathway so that they can co-teach. And having the math teachers, the science teachers, the history teachers develop course sequences together this is an unnatural act for content teachers. And that is the first sort of level of learning to collaborate across the disciplines for them that Lync learning already brings with it. The next level, though, is being successful in college and career has all of these social and emotional learning to learn skills, learning to like note-taking and reading and revising and editing that are not really the province of any one teacher, but often is assigned to, say, after-school tutors or to after-school partners or college knowledge folks. And getting teachers to include these after-school partners in their professional development, and also getting to know from the expertise that outside partners bring about how to help kids make the transition to post-secondary, or how to help understand a math teacher how to build social and emotional learning skills and think of themselves as a youth development professional rather than a math teacher. Those are the kinds of supports that teachers say initially were kind of scary for them because it meant they had to rethink themselves. But many teachers that we interviewed said, I love teaching again. I love coming back. I was going to quit. I was burnt out. But now I see myself as a youth development person, and by working in collaboration more and having the time to collaborate with colleagues, I know how to be a better teacher, and I'm loving teaching again. That was an important insight.
Great. Marisa, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think Jorge covered it. Thank you.
Well, we're kind of coming up on our time, so I want to start wrapping us up. Again, many, many thanks to Marisa and Jorge for this really great conversation. And thanks to all of you on the phone for joining us today and for all you do. We want to invite everyone on the call to access the guidebook and case studies on the Gardner Center website. The URL is on your screen, and we'll also distribute it in our follow-up communication.
Ronita?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just one thing around this. When you access the site, what you will have is an opportunity to download each of the cases and introductory chapters separately so that you don't have to download the whole book. However, we do have, if you reach out to me, and I wish now that I had put my email address on this, but when you go to the site, there will be an email address for you to reach out to our communications folks. if you want some hard copies of the entire guidebook, we can make those available, especially if you provide us, we'll do it for free. All we might need and ask you is if you have a FedEx or a mailing account that we can use, fine. If not, we'll still get them to you. And also, for those of you who are capacity builders in your districts or in organizations, if it is useful for you to have the whole suite of all of them, or to print the entire guidebook, and you want more than 5 or 6 copies, which we can provide you by mail, we can provide you with a print-ready copy of the entire book that you can take to Kinko's with instructions, and they will be able to, the most cheapest way to print the entire guidebook for you if you want to do it in larger quantities, say for a professional development series or other activity like that.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Jorge. And we will follow up in our communication with you all about how to access the guidebook, and we'll also provide Jorge and Marisa's contact information for those of you who would like to follow up with them with any specific questions. As we close, we would like to remind everyone to save the date for the upcoming Lync Learning Institute, which will take place March 16th and 17th in Long Beach. The Institute will be a time when practitioners from across the field will gather along with capacity builders, others seeking to advance Lync learning practice. We hope you'll be able to join us. And really importantly, please be on the lookout for the Alliance's new website, which will launch next week. So stay tuned for some information about that. It's going to have a lot of great new resources and content for all of you to advance your work. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Anne to close us out.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you all for joining us today. And as we sort of started with, we want to ask a little bit of you in an interactive manner to sort of get your input, if we can indulge and get your time for a couple more minutes. We really want to get your feedback on topics that you're most interested in learning more about, both at the Institute, but also through other webinars and in-person meetings. So in just a second, a survey is going to appear on your screen. And if you have literally a minute, we would love it if you would fill that in. We are, as you know, working collectively and together to make sure that our society, our communities really can achieve equity at scale. And the young people that we all care about, that you all work with and inspire every day, all have unlimited potential. And we all believe collectively that they are deserving of unlimited futures, right? So thank you again for working with us to help us move closer to a time when all students have the ability to light their own way to success in college and career and civic life. With that, I just want to, again, Marisa, Jorge, thank you for inspiring us with your research and your passion and your continued belief in what is possible. And we thank all of you for your work, for your partnership, and for your participation today. And with that, we will close the webinar and look forward to the next time we get together and have a conversation.